So I can't say the iPhone 16 Pro is the best smartphone camera out right now, but what I can say is this is definitely the best iPhone camera we've got, and a lot of the content online is overlooking one key detail about the photos this smartphone camera can make. Let's talk about it. And big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. So if you are new here, the objective of the smartphone versus professional photographer videos is for me to take my 10 years of experience as a professional photographer and share my thoughts on the latest and greatest smartphone cameras through the eyes of a professional photographer. Now, typically my goal with these videos is to figure out how close these smartphones are to professional cameras, but in today's case, I've already established that iPhones can take photos that are very close to professional cameras if you're doing everything right. So today I have three main things I want to figure out in this video. The first is simply how good are the three cameras on the iPhone 16 Pro. The second is figuring out how much of an improvement we're seeing on each of these cameras, especially compared to the previous iPhone 15 Pro. And last but not least, I want to answer the question of if you should upgrade or not. Now, two quick notes before we get started. If you saw the last video in this series on the Google Pixel 9 Pro, I said if that video got 2,000 thumbs up that I would make a video comparing it to the iPhone 16 Pro. Y'all crushed it on that video. It got well over 2,000 thumbs up. So next video on the channel will be a comparison between the iPhone 16 Pro and the Google Pixel 9 Pro. And the second note is all I ask from y'all today is to hit the thumbs up button on this video and drop a comment if you enjoy it. Making videos about smartphones can be a little bit tedious to get all the examples together, and by y'all engaging with the video like that, it helps out the channel so much and it makes all this work worth it. So let's get into everything with the iPhone 16 Pro. First and foremost, the most important thing we have to talk about today is how I'm making these photos. Now, one of the big mistakes I've seen in other videos on YouTube is people thinking that they are shooting in the right format for their photos, when in reality, they're essentially shooting JPEGs. Now, unless I otherwise state it, every photo in this video is made using Apple RAW. The reason I do that is one, it allows me to get all the data for the photos, and it allows you to get a picture of what the phone is capable of at its absolute max capacity. When you do not shoot RAW with an iPhone, you get all the computational elements and all the software elements of the phone baked into the file, and it's not an accurate representation of what the phone can actually do. And unfortunately, that's the big mistake I've seen in so many videos online right now. They think they're editing RAW files, but when they go into the computer, you don't see that DNG file type. If you are going to edit a photo from an iPhone and it doesn't say DNG on it, it is not a RAW file and you're not getting the most out of the camera. And if you're not really sure what I'm talking about, I made a video last year going over how I make photos with my iPhone, how I set it up. I'll go ahead and link that in the description down below so you can know how to set your camera to RAW and take advantage of it. Now, one more little note, I'm using the iPhone 16 Pro Max for the photos in today's video, but all the information I'm going over applies to both cameras. There's nothing that's specific to the Pro or the Pro Max. Now, the first thing I want to go over today is the new upgraded ultra-wide lens. Now, the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max has this 48 megapixel improved ultra-wide lens, and when I was out testing this, the first thing I noticed was on the back of the phone, my screen, when I was looking at the images, I did think they looked better. I wasn't really sure, you know, sometimes the screens on these phones are so good, it can play tricks on you. So when I got home and looked at the images in the computer, the first thing that I noticed was they do look better. Like, there is a clear night and day improvement to these photos. Now, I went a step farther and did some testing comparing this to the 15 Pro just so I could quantify what exactly it is about these images that look better. And the main thing that I noticed is, one, there is an uptick in resolution, but this uptick in resolution actually allows for images that feel more natural. My biggest critique of iPhones since the beginning of this series has always been that iPhone images have a tendency to look overly digital and not as sharp as they could be, especially when you compare them to DSLRs and mirrorless. With the iPhone 16 Pro, when you zoom in on these images, especially when you compare them to the 15 Pro, it's a big improvement. Now, there were some negatives to the ultra-wide photos that were still present, the biggest one being a little bit of softness in the corners. It's pretty much known with iPhone ultra-wide photos that you're not going to get a ton of details in the corners, and I saw that with the iPhone 16 Pro like I've seen with previous models. It was improved, but it was still there. It wasn't sharp edge to edge, but overall, I loved the way these photos look, and those results got me pretty excited, so I tested out the Telephoto lens as well, and the Telephoto images from the 16 Pro, crazy. I mean, these DNG files, these RAW files are absolutely fantastic. The best I've seen from an iPhone when you're using this 5x zoom. Once again, in previous videos in this series with iPhones, I was extremely critical of the telephoto lens. I personally just thought it was terrible. Like, I didn't understand why anyone would want to use it. But when I did testing of the telephoto on the 16 Pro, I noticed there was so much more detail to the images. This photo of this shoe is the best example of this. You can clearly make out what the shoe has written on it versus the 15 Pro where it's a little bit chunky and digital. The photos with the telephoto lens look stellar and are much better than previous iPhones when you compare them side by side. That's really all I can say. I'm just surprised. Like, I'm surprised and impressed. I don't really need to go too in depth on that one. Now, the final lens on the 16 Pro we have to talk about is the native 24mm focal length, which going into this video, I assumed was going to be basically the exact same as the 15 Pro because there was no talk of improvements to this native 24mm lens, which most people use for their everyday photography. Most of the focus was on the ultra-wide, and the results that I got in this test were pretty much exactly on point with that hypothesis. The native camera on the 16 Pro is in line with what you would expect from probably the last 3 iPhones. The RAW files look really good. You could, in the right lighting conditions, get away with a lot with these images, and they're stellar. You know, they're the exact same thing essentially to the 15 Pro. Now, let's answer those final questions that I proposed at the beginning of the video, but before I do that, I want to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. Now, like I mentioned earlier in the video, and as we saw throughout the video, with improvements to the iPhone, this is becoming more and more of a serious professional tool if you want to make photography. And I actually made a photo with my iPhone 14 Pro that ended up in my last book. It was so good. So there's no debate anymore if iPhones can make stellar photography. And if you're someone who is only using an iPhone, you now have the ability to make money with the art you're creating with a device in your pocket. And no one makes it easier to do this than Squarespace. Squarespace allows you to build a website that looks professional, that looks beautiful, most importantly with no web design experience, using all the templates they have available, and creative tools like Fluid Engine, which allow you to customize templates very easily. Personally, I think one of the easiest ways to make a little bit of side money with photos made on your iPhone is by selling prints, and Squarespace allows you to sell prints with ease using their e-commerce tools. I actually made a video last month where I break down the entire process of creating and selling prints. I'll link that in the description down below so you can check it out. And if you're someone who has great photos on your phone, you can begin printing them and selling them with all the amazing e-commerce tools that Squarespace has to offer. Some other tools that Squarespace has to help you take your business to the next level are things like Squarespace Payments, which allows you to easily process payments all through Squarespace. And you have things like their marketing tools, which allow you to directly contact your customers with things like promotions, or maybe it's a newsletter, or you simply sharing your photos with people who are interested and moving your business off of social media. If you want to check out Squarespace for yourself, try it out, take advantage of all the amazing tools they have to offer. You can go to squarespace.com/EvanRant to start a free trial and use code EvanRant to save 10% at checkout. That's squarespace.com/EvanRant to start a free trial and use code EvanRant to save 10% at checkout. Big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Now, one more improvement we saw with the 16 Pro, and I use the word improvement in quotation marks, is the adaptation of this camera button that you can double tap and you can slide through a bunch of different options like different cameras, zoom, different depths for portrait mode. You can get an exposure compensation. The reason I put improvement in quotes is because this is a feature that personally I feel is somewhat of a marketing gimmick, and the reason why is because it's really awkward and uncomfortable to use, and I personally thought that the way you would primarily use this already has a way you can use it on the iPhone that's much easier. In the past, when I needed to do exposure compensation, I would simply tap on my screen and slide down to bring the exposure down, or slide up to bring the exposure up, and it makes way more sense than having to tap a button and change it with this slider up here that is much smaller. Alright, so final thoughts on the iPhone 16 Pro. One thing I want to mention is this desert titanium color. The biggest marketing ripoff I've ever fallen for from Apple. I was thinking that this was going to be some type of tactical brown color based on the images that I saw online and that I saw in the promo videos. I was really excited thinking Apple did something a little bit different and out of the box. And I opened this up and realized, oh, it's just rose gold given a cool name like Desert Titanium. So that was a huge letdown. Now, to answer the questions from the beginning of the video, one, is the iPhone 16 Pro any good? The cameras are very good on the 16 Pro, and like I've already mentioned throughout the video, this is definitely the best iPhone camera out there when it comes to ultra-wide telephoto and that native camera. That's not much of an improvement, but overall, when you package those three things together, it's definitely the best iPhone out there for photography that's available right now. Now, to answer our second question of what improvements or lack of improvements did I see compared to the 15 Pro, personally, the biggest improvement was in the ultra-wide lens as well as the telephoto lens. I thought the improvements there were stellar, especially when you compare them to the 15 Pro, but the native camera is pretty much on par with the 15 Pro, and if you're someone who is not using RAW files and you're just using this as like an everyday snapshot camera, it really doesn't make any sense to go with this, and that leads to the third question that I asked: is it worth upgrading? If you're someone who takes your iPhone photography seriously, you look at this as more of a professional device that you want to learn how to make the most out of. You want to make sure you're making images in proper lighting. You're paying attention to things like your settings, your exposure. You know how to edit RAW files in your computer or on your iPhone. I say go for it. But if you're someone who has a 15 Pro and maybe you use it casually and you don't care about all those minor details, it really doesn't make sense to upgrade. If you're someone who has, say, a 14 Pro or a 13 or anything prior to that, yeah, you'll probably see a lot of improvement moving to the 16 Pro, but everyone who has last year's model, the 15 Pro, you can probably skip this upgrade and look at this as basically an iPhone 15s. Yes, there are some improvements, but the improvements only really matter to people who understand how to spot and see those improvements and take advantage of them. So those are my thoughts on the iPhone 16 Pro from a professional photographer standpoint. If you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. Leave me a comment if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Y'all know I'm always down for any engagement in the comment section. And remember, next week, hopefully at the end of the week, there will be a video comparing this to the Google Pixel 9 Pro, which I'm personally so excited about. These cameras are like neck and neck with each other. There's a lot of things that I want to compare side by side, especially considering how much I love the Google Pixel 9 Pro. So stay tuned to that video. I'll catch y'all in the next one.